catcher. He's kind of short and stocky, but he plays center field. He plays multiple positions, and I think he pitches some too. So, yeah. I'll tell her you asked him. Hello, how are you, Rex?
Oh, I'm doing all right.
Good.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
You have any time off this summer?
I took a week
Well, that's
back
good.
in the summer.
Good.
Took a day off. So the chair of this council, Ron Walker, is not able to be with us today. I believe he's actually out of the country on an extended trip. I hope it's a pleasant one. And I don't think he ever got around to, I know that he was really pressed for time in the last week or two that he was in town. And also with the unexpected death of his brother, I think also caused some issues for him as well. And so I don't think he ever designated anyone to chair this meeting. So I think, and I told him that in the absence of that, then I would pretend to be him for at least for a little while. So welcome. I will remind you that the meeting is being broadcast. And so the second item on the agenda is the consideration of summary notes from the March 7th, 2019 meeting. And this will be a quick and easy one because it turns out we don't actually have any summary notes from that particular meeting. We thought we did, but we don't. And so that does a little hitch in these things that sometimes happen when you transition from one person to another. So at the next meeting, we will bring back the summary notes to you for approval for both that meeting and for this meeting as well. And at this point, then I'd like to turn it over to John Wyatt, our Director of External Relations, for a legislative update or actually to tell us about the actual outcomes of the 86th Texas Legislature.
Great. Thank you, Rex. You know, I was just mentioning, I guess it's been a little over 3 months since the legislature ended. It feels like it's been 3 years since the legislature ended. Lots happened in that amount of time, but I'm going to present an update on some of the major outcomes from the session, and then a quick overview of what we expect for the rest of this interim going forward. In terms of the budget, you can see there was about a $904 million increase in general revenue over the 18-19 funding levels. As you know, general revenue is that portion of funding that comes directly from the state, so your state tax dollars, does not include federal funds and other sources of revenue. The two-year institutions saw an increase of $141.7 million, so about a 7% increase in funding from 18-19 levels. The coordinating board saw about a $237 million increase, or a 17% increase over 18-19 levels, largely accounted for through a couple of new programs that were funded at the coordinating board. In terms of formula funding for core operations and contact hour funding were largely level. I think there was a small bump in the contact hour funding compared to the 18-19 levels. However, the legislature made a significant investment in the performance-based funding formulas in the two-year sectors. For the community colleges, the legislature increased the funding rate for the student success points from $172 a point to $203 per point, which is a very large increase. For the TSTC return value model, the legislature increased the percentage from 27 to 36%, which was actually beyond what the board and our formula advisory committees had recommended for this biennium. In terms of the success points, the legislature used the existing weights, but they also included some language in the appropriations bill. And that language states that it is the intent of the legislature that the FY 2022-23 General Appropriations Act reflect revised weights in the student success formula. Specifically, that is to increase transfer from 2 to 2.75, the weight for critical field awards from 2.25 to 3, and the weight for non-critical field awards from 2 to 1.2. So this is language in the bill that says that it is the intent of the legislature. It would be up to the legislature next session to decide to actually implement those changes. And I know this is also something that our Formula Advisory Committee is looking at in terms of the success point weights. In terms of the coordinating board budget, some of the highlights, TEOG was level funded, so the same as 1819, 7.5 for the state and technical colleges, 88.5 for the community colleges. We did get a couple of new funding items that are relevant to the sector. We got $250,000 for an open educational resources repository. The legislature has been very focused on OER resources and how we can make these free materials more widely available to students. So they funded us for a repository which can act as the central point by which faculty can provide OER resources and then other faculty can utilize them. So Rex can tell you all about where we are in implementing that. We also received $300,000 for TSIA enhancement, so specifically for a new online system for students to retrieve and send test results. Jarrell Booker oversees the division that handles that. There were a couple of riders in the budget to be aware of. In regards to the professional nursing shortage reduction program, there were two changes. A change was made to require the coordinating board to set individual targets for enrollment increases in the over 70 program. Previously, there were standard increase requirements, but now we'll be able to vary those by institution. The other requirement is for a study to look at the effectiveness of PNSRP in addressing the nursing shortage and to work with stakeholders to come up with recommendations for how it may be made more effective. Hopefully you're aware that a letter went out to institutions with nursing programs requesting that they nominate individuals to serve on this work group. We have a deadline of September 20th to receive those nominees. And once we have the nominees, we expect that we'll have the first work group meeting in October. There was also a change to a TEA rider regarding their program to fund OER materials, and the new language requires that they prioritize courses commonly offered for dual credit in making grants to develop OER materials. They also added a requirement that the Commissioner of Education collaborate with the Commissioner of Higher Education to ensure that those materials are of a collegiate level of rigor. Some of the policy outcomes, has anybody here heard of SB 25? No? Obviously, this is one of the big focuses of the legislature this session, was how can we make transfer more efficient for students and reduce the cost to students in the state. So ultimately, SB 25 by Senator West and Chairman Turner was adopted. There are many components to this legislation. It includes new reporting requirements so that institutions will identify courses that transferred but did not apply to a major and explain why the course did not apply. It has requirements regarding earlier degree plan filing and advisement. It has requirements for institutions to develop recommended course sequences for their programs. It allows dual credit courses in fields of study or programs of study to be formula funded. And it also charges the coordinating board to convene a committee to examine the issue of whether the core curriculum should be bifurcated into a general core and a meta-major core, and whether that would assist in making transfer more efficient and easier for students. In terms of implementing this, I know Rex has a panel later that will talk about all of this, but we do have negotiated rulemaking committees either scheduled or will soon be scheduled in late September and early October to address degree planning, to address course sequencing, and also to convene this advisory committee on the core curriculum. So those meetings should be coming up in the next few weeks. Another priority for the coordinating board that was passed was the creation of the Texas Works paid internship program. This builds on Governor Abbott's tri-agency workforce recommendations to increase the availability of paid internships in the state. So it would remove the current off-campus requirement. Well, it did remove the current off-campus requirement for college work study, so you no longer have to provide that 20% off-campus. And what we will do is we will utilize some portion of college work study funds to fund Texas Works at the coordinating board. And the agency will work with employers to identify high-quality, workforce-relevant internships, and then connect students with these opportunities. And the goal here is to both allow students to develop those marketable skills that are going to help them in the workforce, but also to put money in their pocket so that they can better afford their education, so that they can earn while they learn. We also had some changes to our student loan program. The state reassigned how it allocates its private activity bonding authority among the various entities that utilize that resource. The coordinating board uses these to fund our student loan program. Long story short, the greater efficiency that we're going to realize as a result of this change will allow our loan program to save $4 million a year in unnecessary interest payments. That means that we're going to continue to be able to keep our loan products, the interest rate, as low as it is. We currently have one of the lowest, if not the lowest, state-based interest rates for a student loan product. And then the final item I'd mention is, again, filing a degree plan was included in SB 25, HB 3808, and SB 1324. So the new requirement is that dual credit students will now file a degree plan upon reaching a certain amount of hours. The idea being that they will then be better advised in terms of the dual credit they're taking and how it will help lead efficiently to their degree. And as I mentioned, we do have a negotiated rulemaking committee coming up in late September that will look at that issue. So those are the kind of the major outcomes from session that I'd note. In terms of the interim, we do expect in the fall that we will get the interim charges from the Senate and House higher education committees. Those charges lay out the major issues that the legislature wants to examine during the interim. And then usually in the spring and summer, they will have interim committee meetings in which the committees will receive testimony and deliberate on these issues with an eye toward what they want to do in the next session. So we will be very involved in preparing testimony for that. We're also very pleased that yesterday the board announced that Dr. Harrison Keller will be the new commissioner for higher education. So Commissioner Keller will begin on October 1, and we're very excited to have him on board. I know that he's going to want to work with your institutions and other higher education stakeholders to understand your priorities. And so we're looking forward to getting him here and helping make sure that he's well informed regarding community and technical colleges. And I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, John. And I will actually fill in some more details on the transfer piece of this when we get to that part of the agenda, and particularly SB 25. But thank you. And at this time, we're now scheduled to hear from the Texas Association of Community Colleges and the Community College Association of Texas Trustees. So. All right, thank you all for being here. So, yeah.
Thank you. probably intentionally forgotten much of it. So I'll keep my recap on session very briefly, and maybe frame it with a big, gigantic thank you. Thank you to all of our members for your engagement during session. I think it is fair to say that community colleges specifically, and certainly higher education did, but community colleges specifically, we had a good session in 2019, and in large part because of the respect and admiration for community colleges by our legislators, by our policymakers, by a larger part because our members showed up. You were fully engaged. But I would also extend my gratitude to this agency. Dr. Gardner and Dr. Peebles and Dr. Eklund, very good partners of ours before session started and through session, up to and including SB 25, and we'll talk about that more granular in a moment. But we saw the agency as a partner during session, and I think many of the results came from that. I would like to say that while we are pleased that the legislature did support community colleges in terms of formula funding, not at the 7% level, but just shy of 4% for community colleges specifically. There is, and I'm a consummate optimist, you know this about me, but there is a little hesitation in that increase, in that even as we received just short of $70 million in increases in funding, about a dozen of our individual colleges realize a cut to their allocation, largely because of either flatlining or small reduction in contact hours for those colleges. So in that same space, we have some good thinking and some hard work ahead in terms of thinking about how do we sustain all 50 public community colleges as we look at the 2030 goals of aspirational goals for all of Texas, because in the one hand, we celebrate the increase in funding because it's a lot better than the cuts of 2011. But on the other hand, I look in the eyes of 12 of my members and try to explain how is it that we saw a cut for those colleges, and that's very difficult. But nonetheless, we have to march forward with that. I will say that I am pleased, as John iterated earlier, that the legislature did see the value in increasing our funding for performance-based funding for success points. We aligned ourselves with this agency and the Formula Advisory Committee in 2018 in recommending a $215 per point for success point. We came in unapologetically saying that for our sector, we believe that. We came in saying that the previous 10% cap on overall funding that came out of performance-based funding was no longer. And so not only did we see an increase in the rate and an increase in dollars, but now as a percentage of the whole community college funding, 12%, 12.5% of it comes from in the success points formula. And we see that now as a new floor going forward. And as we get ready for 2021, we will continue to see an emphasis in performance-based funding for community colleges. A word on dual credit. From fall of 17 to fall of 18, we saw a 30,000 student increase in dual credit. Suffice it to say that we do not necessarily need any more policy levers to accentuate the demand by high school students, by school districts across the state for the availability of college credit while students are still in high school. 30,000 student increase from one fall to another is a substantial increase. And so on behalf of the association, I would say that I am very pleased with not one, but the two reforms that we did realize in the 2019 session. The first reform that John talked about in Senate Bill 1324 and also in Senate Bill 25 that would require students to declare a degree plan at 15 semester credit hours. That's an important juncture. It's an important junction that we need to have that a very intentional conversation with that student about his or her interest in a particular major in a particular study. Frankly, I think the data from the coordinating board, and Julie can correct me if I'm off, I think that will only touch about 30% of the high school graduating classes, because most students graduate from high school with about 15 credit hours. So we think that it only has about 30%. However, in the months and years ahead, as we build up the advising processes to implement that particular part of the bill, that we think that those practices and those training of advisors and counselors should also benefit all of the other students who are coming to our campuses, either through to the dual-credit modality. Maybe as a segue to going forward, as you know, I am a former lobbyist. One would argue I am a recovering lobbyist. And so you get ready for the next session, the day after the previous session. And so here we are. The association has stood up 3 committees, and the first of which will meet next week. Actually, the first of which met 2 weeks ago, and the second one will meet next week. We resurrected the metrics committee of the association, and Dr. Eklund has been a great partner with us in the metrics committee. As John indicated, there was an interest by the legislature to reconsider some of the weights of some of the metrics in a performance-based system. We are going to be asking the metrics committee to do a very deep dive into those weights, into those metrics, and working alongside the formula advisory committee so that we can provide sound recommendations to not only this board, but also to the legislature in 2021, till we get the right weights for the right metrics. So the metrics committee has already begun that work. The legislative committee this next round will be chaired by William Serrata, president of El Paso Community College. Dr. Serrata was elected by our members at the July meeting as our incoming vice chair, and so therefore he has a distinction to serve as committee chair for the legislative committee, which is our essentially our standing committee for the, and that committee will begin its hard work this month, September. And I talked to Dr. Serrata yesterday, and I said, you know, we only have 10 months to get ready. The session starts in about 17 months, but I'd like to be able to have the policy priorities, the strategy, the analyses, everything in play by the October meeting of 2020. So we have about 10 to 12 months to get that done. And then we are standing up a new committee that we are, and I think you'll like this, Rex and David, we're calling it the 60 by 30 Strategy Committee that is going to take a broad view of how our colleges, our 50 public community colleges, what is it that we need to do today to make sure that we help the state meet its goal in 60-30. And that begins with intensive analyses of the data. What is the population going to look like in 2030, both in terms of demographic shifts that we are seeing happen before our very eyes, but also demographic shifts that are occurring within the state. The state is contracting in the middle section, and yet we have millions of Texans who live in rural Texas, and we cannot for a second leave them behind. They have to be part of our calculus. They have to be part of our focal point. And so that committee is going to be taking that approach and looking, as I mentioned earlier, at the formula funding, at the formula itself, to make sure that we are able to sustain all 50, not just in the years ahead, but in the decades to come. And so that committee will be co-chaired by Dr. Serrata from El Paso Community College and Dr. Mimi Valek from Brownsville College. And I expect that they will start their first meeting in October and then move pretty aggressively so that we can make a set of recommendations for this body and our association. So with that, I will turn it to Dr. Martinez and say that it is, let me just share one more thing before I turn it over to Dr. Martinez. On or about Sine Die, which is the dates that are still hazy in my mind, but I know about Sine Die. My wife, and some of you know my wife, Virginia, came home one day and said, "Hey, darling, how would you like to add 585 miles to your commute?" And of course, the response of a relatively young couple is, "But of course." So I share that in jest to say that my wife has taken a position as associate provost at the University of Texas at El Paso, and where she is where I need to be. So we have both moved to El Paso, and the board of directors of the association graciously allowed me to work with them in a transition. So I love working in this space, and let me say that again for emphasis. I love working in this space, and particularly for all 50 of our colleges. But sometime in the summer of 2020, you will be hearing from my successor in this space. So, Dr. Martinez.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here as well. So I bring greetings from the CAT board, and one of ours serves on your board as well. And so what I'd like to do is give you a walkthrough, but with a visual, because I know a lot of times you all hear the reports and hear the statistics, and I thought shameless plug to our CAT quarterly meeting, first of all, but also give you the opportunity to really get a good understanding of how far I think this association has gone to really provide, I think, strong and quality professional development that with our members here that serve on the board and those that are presidents and chancellors here, your governing board gives them the tools that they need and the networking that they need, which I don't underestimate when you have large, small, very large colleges with very diverse challenges before them to come forward, talk amongst themselves, but also learn from folks at the national level, at your individual regional level, and among our board members to try to really strategize as a community college community, in terms of how to work through some of these challenges that we have before us. So this is our board. We have before you, and so I want to first introduce some of the new members that you see pictured here. We had our elections during our CAT annual conference held June 2019, and it was here in Austin. We had Nicole Eversman, who is from Austin Community College, now representing very large colleges. Armin Cantini, representing Galveston College, our small colleges. Annette Carlisle, representing our large colleges from Amarillo College. Joe Carrington is a re-elected trustee from Kilgore College, representing our medium colleges, and then Danny Gertson was also re-elected from Wharton County Junior College. And so those round out our board. We have, I think, a very diverse group of folks, not only just regionally, but just in terms of who they represent and the backgrounds that they bring forward. The purpose of the newsletter and all that we do in CAT is really to make sure that we're hitting our target with Momentum 2021. And that particular plan is a 5-year plan that predates my position here as director. It really is a plan that wants to delve deeper into making sure that our trustees are engaged and involved in policy development. So we have an engagement and education committee chaired by Dr. Debbie Plyler. We have a committee on finance. And this is important because really this is the only second year that CAT as an association has really produced a budget. Before that, TAC really had the opportunity to do that for the association, but now that we have budgets that we can review and information that we have, we're really beginning to have ownership of that process, and we thank TAC for that, and I think it's been a really good development. A resource committee has also been produced to help sustain the association. So as you know, our member dues come through TAC, but trying to really get an idea of what it would require to have this association stand up on its own, or at least provide some more revenue to provide some supplemental efforts that may not have been occurring right now, but are needed in the community. And then finally, a nominations committee as well. This has really, I think, been a strong point in terms of making sure that we have contested elections, that we have people that are actually wanting to vie for those positions on the board, and they represent people from across the state. So I think it's gone very well. And I think what you'll find is that a lot of the work that we're doing is actually now based on research. So if you can scroll to our next page, and I'll talk, just one more, please. Oh, that's not coming out well. Right here. So every year we've established a survey, and that survey will determine what what topics are provided through our professional development. For those of you that may have been aware, we had a trustee leadership seminar in Weatherford And that included Representative Turner, who spoke specifically about SB 25, the bill that he helped put forward. And that type of information will now go out to our regions, and it's important because some of our members cannot come to our annual conference, and so we're really making strides in terms of identifying where we need to go and what information is the most important to go forward. So the survey that you see in front of you, and hopefully those of you that are trustees and regents, is really provided so that the association has data to back up what types of professional development is offered and how that information can instruct the policy priorities that we put forward and also the professional development that we put forward through these regional meetings. I'm not sure if... So we're going to have to go forward because I'm not sure if we can go down a little bit more. Okay. We also been involved with some of the dual credit studies in terms of making sure that information is getting out to our membership. And so this is just one avenue that we do that as well. I want to let you know that within our own annual survey that we just conducted, it's still underway. And so the deadline to respond to that survey is next Thursday. So we really invite our trustees and regents to complete it. But what I will tell you, the preliminary information in terms of what are the needs of our trustees in terms of topics are student success, so learning more about student success and what great programs are out there, how they can do better at the work that they're doing on the policy level, strategic planning in terms of how can they improve upon the planning that is conducted on each individual campus. And the third I thought was very interesting is campus safety is also an area where we're seeing an uptick in regents and trustees wanting to learn more about how they can help their colleges make sure that their campuses are secure in terms of policy and obviously funding that they put forward. I spoke a little bit about the trustee leadership seminars. I will tell you that there's 2 more that are planned. Alamo Colleges district has said yes to having one on their particular campus or their district, and also South Texas College. So we will be going out to those communities to provide this type of information where we have a legislator present, and then we also have a specific topic such as, it could be transfer issues. This last Weatherford meeting, we had a great session on accreditation and the role of a trustee. And so I really want to emphasize on the fact that these seminars are really good opportunities for the members to come together and talk about issues and discuss issues that are pertinent to those particular campuses. And then finally, what I'd like to say is that we have our CAT annual meeting. We have established a date, and we've established a date for 2021 as well. So the next meeting will be held in Corpus Christi at the Omni Hotel in Corpus Christi, June 4th through 5th. And that is a significant area because Carol Scott, who is our chair-elect, will be coming chair, and she obviously is from that area representing Del Mar College, and so she's very happy to host us. And the following will be here in Austin on 2021 because it is a legislative year, and we understand how important it is to be here during that time. And so if you can remember the dates, June 10th through 11th, we'll be at the same hotel that we were at last year, the Westin, this year at the Westin at the Domain. So we have our dates secured. We are working very closely with TAC for the next session in terms of the policy priorities that we will be building. We will be meeting our legislative committee, their legislative committee, but also other members. And what I'd like to say is we would invite this particular council to look at the opportunities to engage and look at the policy priorities and see where maybe we can work with the council in terms of identifying if those particular recommendations that we put forward are something that this particular council also sees as beneficial. So really trying to be more intentional about the relationship between CAT, TAC, and the council itself, and definitely open for any any suggestions that you might have in that respect, but really making sure that we work with you, not just sharing what we're doing, but also you all are all members either of CAT or TAC, obviously, and making that a little more, I think, a direct connection. And so with that, I'll close my comments.
Question? Ideas?
Yeah, any questions or comments? I have one comment to make, and that is, while I know that the institutions have been certainly deeply involved in 60 by 30, I do appreciate the added focus that committee will have in looking at that and making sure that we achieve those goals, if not go beyond them, by 2030. So I appreciate that.
I would take a moment, and since I know the commissioner is not at the dais, but to say thank you for 15 years of service to the great state of Texas. We're a generation apart, he and I, but we were raised in the same hometown of El Paso, and so it's been an honor to work with this agency, with his leadership, and so on behalf of the association, I would share through you and with you our gratitude to the commissioner for his service to the state. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments for?
I would like to comment also about Jacob. Your work has been remarkable, what you have provided us, especially with the legislature. It's been phenomenal what you provided us with the updates and mainly with the follow-up and guiding us on what to do when we would come here to deal with the every 2 years. And that was it's very valuable what you provided, and we hope that you're still going to be around to provide that continuous insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. It's been an honor, and only our Lord will know whether I'm still be around, but I will still always be an advocate. Thank you.
Yeah, and since I'm not sure whether you'll be in this forum or not, again, because I know that can be a little,
Sure.
over the coming year, that may or may not be an opportunity for you. Yeah, I too would like to thank you for your service to TAC and to your willingness to always collaborate and talk to and commiserate with those of us at the coordinating board. We do appreciate that a lot.
Thank you, Rex.
Thank you much.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so let me back up to something that John Wyatt talked about with OER. And so just a little quick update for you on that. The previous legislative session authorized a study of the feasibility of establishing a repository for open education resources in Texas, and also provided some grant money for faculty to develop open education resources. And as John pointed out, they added to that, and so there's two pieces to it, and one is that it directed the coordinating board to establish a repository for open education resources, and the request for offers on that will go out, well, it's all set up to be approved at the October board meeting, and upon approval of the board in October, then the formal request will actually go out probably the following Monday, if not the day after on Friday. And we'll get that out, and essentially that'll go to vendors those interested in establishing their repository. And then at the same board meeting, they will also be asked to approve the RFA for additional grants to faculty to develop open educational resources materials. And we started with a $5,000 and $10,000, $5,000 grant for the development of one course and $10,000 for the development of 2 or more courses. And through some budgeting and that kind of stuff, anyway, to spend the money is what it really boils down to. We increased those amounts to $8,000 and $16,000, because one of the things we discovered in this first round and that we thought we would get an answer to but weren't sure about was what's the appropriate level of funding to really incentivize faculty to participate in the program and to develop these resources. So the RFA that we have up for approval with cause, and then the board in October will stay at that $8,000 and $16,000 level. And one of the nice things about the way that the rider is written for this in the Appropriations Act is that any money that's not spent for the repository, we can devote to grants. And what that means is in the first year, the establishment of the repository will probably run around $100,000 or so, plus perhaps, but the maintenance thereof will be more like $20,000, $25,000 annually, we suspect. And so while the first year, the grant money will be less, in the second year, we will have more money available for grants to support the development of open educational resources. So that was one of the many good things that came out of this last legislative session. And there's a lot of interest in this, and as you know, it is a way to certainly help drive down the cost of higher education for students. And anything we can do to help drive down the cost of higher education for students is almost always a good thing. So the next item on the agenda is an update concerning issues related to transfer. And so I guess we'll start with fill in a little more detail on Senate Bill 25 and talk about that a little bit. As was pointed out by Mr. White, there are a lot of component pieces to this thing. There are a number of parts to it. We have separated those parts both for things like negotiated rulemaking and so forth. Next week, the negotiated rulemaking, week after next, the negotiated rulemaking will take place for the degree plan filing. And that includes both the requirement that all students have a degree plan at 30 semester credit hours. Dual credit students have it within the second semester after achieving 15 semester credit hours. So that's a part of it. The language of the bill is pretty straightforward in that regard, and so we suspect that the rulemaking for it will also be pretty straightforward. But we'll see how that goes. And we have 3 successive negotiated rulemaking committees set up for September 23rd, 24th, and 25th, and the degree plan filing is one of those 3. So that piece of it we're taking care of early on. John also mentioned that a part of SB 25 is to allow formula funding for field of study and program of study courses for dual credit students. And the previous legislative session put into law that institutions could offer field of study and program of study courses to dual credit students, but since what they can offer and what they get paid for is in 2 different parts of statute, we never got our, time gets you in the Texas legislative session and never got around to actually making it fundable. So this time there was a piece of cleanup that occurred in Senate Bill 25 is to also make those courses then not only available for offering, but also fundable as well. So while that's I think that's a small but yet an important addition to that. There's also a part of Senate Bill 25 that requires reporting, as Mr. White mentioned also. There's 2 pieces to this. One is the reporting that 4-year institutions are required to do that he talked about, and that is to report on those courses that transferred, courses that not only courses that didn't transfer, but also courses that transferred but were not applied to a degree program. And so this is aimed at trying to find out what are the underlying reasons for the excess hours that we see. And I know that in previous presentations we've talked about the fact that students who transfer from a 2-year to a 4-year institution usually graduate with more hours than students who started at a 4-year institution and finished there. And so this is designed to try to look at some of the underlying reasons for that and what are the reasons that institutions and or the coordinating board, separately or jointly, can actually affect and do something about. And so that piece of it is being worked out. There is a group of folks from the university systems and from the independent universities in Texas that have been meeting about this. We've had one meeting with them already. We have talked a lot internally about what the reporting would look like, what kind of questions we want to have answered through that, and so forth. But that's still being worked out as we speak. Another part of this has to do with course sequencing. Course sequencing doesn't really have a timeline attached to it in a way, and so the negotiated rulemaking for the course sequencing for it will occur in January. But this will require institutions to actually post the course sequence for their lower division courses for majors. And this, I've been around a long time, and all of this says to me that they have to post a degree plan that says when you're supposed to take the courses, in what semester, in what sequence, what those courses are. And so I'm one of those that when I did my bachelor's degree, when I started at UT Dallas, then I copied the appropriate page from the catalog for my degree, and as I moved through the semesters, I can't remember if I checked them off or lined through them or something, but I sort of kept that running checklist of these are the courses you've already taken, these are the courses you still need to take, and then when, so that I could not only graduate on time, but actually graduate early. So we think that will be, and what we know is that a lot of college catalogs have gotten away from that very clear delineation of what you're supposed to take and when, and we really believe that this will help students navigate from one institution to another institution, the courses that they need to take to apply to the degree that they're interested in. So that's another piece of Senate Bill 25. There is another piece of it that involves the core curriculum. And so you may or may not be aware that part of the discussion of what came to be Senate Bill 25 over the course of the legislative session revolved around this issue of splitting the core. And the idea initially was that the core curriculum, which is at 42 hours, would be split between a 24-hour general core and an 18-hour discipline-specific core, or actually a meta-major core. And that the idea would be that this would actually help students navigate through a major. Consensus was never really reached on whether that was a good idea or a bad idea, or how it would actually work in effect. And the result of this was that Senate Bill 25 has mandated that a committee be established of, well, I'll come into the makeup of that in just a second, but a committee be established to study this issue and then make recommendations to the Higher Education Coordinating Board on the core curriculum that then may very well find their way into legislation or not. But be that as it may, so there's an advisory committee being established for this. Senate Bill 25 specifies that negotiated rulemaking process be used for the component parts of it. Part of the issue with this particular piece of it is it doesn't result in a rule. It results in recommendations and a report to the board. But we have adopted a sort of hybrid format for this in a sense, so we have sort of combined our statutory requirements for advisory committees with some of the elements of the negotiated rulemaking process itself to set this up. And so the first meeting is tentatively scheduled for either the beginning of October or the end of October. The first meeting date has not been set yet. We just met recently to discuss who the final membership on that would be. The statute specifies an equal number of 2-year and 4-year representatives. The negotiating rule process specifies that a member of the agency will also be on the committee to represent the agency's interest, if you will. So we will have a committee made up of 11 2-year members and 11 4-year members and 1 representative from the coordinating board. Statutorily, advisory committees cannot exceed 24. So in order to maintain the even balance dictated by the legislation, then we're at 23. And one of the other departures from the normal negotiated rulemaking process on this one is that Typically, for example, I mentioned that on the 23rd, 24th, and 25th, we'll have 3 negotiated rulemaking committees convene. And each one of those committees will be presented with a what we refer to as a straw man rule. And it's a place to start. So coordinating board staff drafts these things, and really what they do is they provide a starting point for the committee. Usually these committees can conduct their work in one day. It takes all day, but they can conduct their work in one day. And so the idea of giving them something to begin with really helps with that process, and then the committee can make recommendations to modify, delete things, add things, and so forth, as long as they're in keeping with statute. In this case, though, there will not be a straw man. This is going to take more than one meeting. It may take several, but we do have a report. The report is due to the legislature December 1 of 2020, which means it will have to go to our board no later than October of 2020. So right now, what we're shooting for is to actually be able to take the report to the July 2020 board. And so we will probably have anywhere from, I predict that we'll have anywhere from 3 to 5 meetings on this. But we'll just have to see how that process goes. It's very specific in that it says to look at this issue of splitting the core and creating meta majors, and whether that will then lead to increased efficiency and transfer. So the committee actually has a very specific charge to it as well. A couple other things I want to mention about a transfer is that fields of study are still being conducted. We now have, or close to having, over 30 of them completed. And Dr. Alan Mickey is the program director that's directly responsible for convening these committees and sort of ramrodding them, if you will. And we were talking about this one day, and I give Alan credit for this. And what he got to thinking about is that our committees are always organized around zip codes. But within a zip code, you can have more than one major. And so we report that we have conducted 31 fields of study, actually conducted more than that, but we have completed 30 fields of study and are close to finishing a couple of more. But its reach into majors actually goes further than that. And so we figured out that we're actually impacting somewhere between 60 and 80 majors over this. And these are all majors in the top. And these are all, come out of the top 50 majors for transfer students. So I think it's important to realize that this over time, this could have a far-reaching effect on the excess hours issue and for students. And I think I've related this to y'all before, but in response to a question I received from someone one time, I made a quick run through the catalogs of both UT Austin and A&M College Station to see how many majors they actually offered. And so this was not a scientific thing, and I did this in an afternoon, actually less than that. And I tried not to count where they offered both a BA and a BS in the same thing, Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Science in the same thing. And I counted 133 at one institution and 134 at the other institution. And I quickly thought about, and I can't remember, I think A&M was that one ahead of UT, and I thought I should probably call UT and tell them they needed to get 2 more proposals over to us, ASAP so they could be ahead of A&M. But then I realized then I'd have to call A&M and tell them to submit 2 more, and that could lead to a war we don't want to see.
Submit another 20 more.
Yeah, well, it's true, yeah, just to cover their, probably so. So I think if we've reached a point in the field of study where we're now affecting close to half or more than half of those majors that are out there, then we're affecting a huge, or can affect a huge number of students as we go forward with this. The other thing I'd like to mention is programs of study, which is that 2-year to 2-year transfer effort in looking at AAS degrees and those courses that should be common to all of them across the board. And we to some extent, they got kind of put on a hiatus a little bit because our focus was on trying to develop the fields of study for the top 25 majors before the next legislative session, which occurred starting back in January. And we came within one field of study of reaching that goal. But because of that, we sort of put the program of study on the back burner a little bit. But we've also got them back on the front burner, and we have this round of cause and board in September and October. We'll approve a couple of more program of study committees that we will convene for computer science and business. Yes, sir.
I think you raised an interesting question about trying not to, count the BA and the BS, simply because that varies from school to school, but there can be some significant difference in terms of what you really need to take into core, depending on, it could be a difference in the amount of math, type of math. I don't think it holds anymore, but there used to be a distinction at many schools, and the BA required a foreign language and the BS did not, or the BA may have required an additional year, and I don't know how that's playing out now, but that may be something we want to at least look at in general, at how that plays out across institutions. I don't know if it's that distinctive now, but it used to be a pretty strong difference at many schools between the BA and BS in the same major.
Yeah, and
At that kind of level.
Right.
Not the field of study, probably.
But even at the field of study level, this doesn't always come up, but there are certain fields of study where that issue has been raised about that the feeling is that there may be a significant enough difference between the BA and the BS in that same major that they need to think of it as, if not necessarily two distinctive fields of study, but at least two tracks within that field of study. It doesn't come up often, but it still comes up from time to time. So it's still a concern that ought to be. I agree that we probably need to take a closer look at that.
Quite a while, so I'm glad you mentioned that.
So.
One quick question. You mentioned the Common Core. The advisory committee of that, who are the members of that?
That is still being finalized, but it'll be announced very soon.
All right. Okay, thank you.
And we will try to, that goes out on a widespread basis, but
All right.
we'll make sure everyone knows that. So we're still, we met about that just yesterday, I believe, and so we're still trying to put the finishing touches on that one. And, and it's one of those things where it's a very common dilemma for us with advisory committees that we're statutorily held to 24, and then we get, 40 nominations. And so then there's some requirement that we try to balance that by size and geography. And that's difficult because sometimes you don't get nominations from a geographic area or from a particular size of institution or something. And so that can be sort of putting pieces of the puzzle together too. But we'll actually have that finalized and announce that very soon. Yeah. So any questions or comments about Senate Bill 12? One thing I didn't mention that I should have is about the reporting piece. There's also a reporting piece for community colleges. And from our internal discussions, I think the consensus has been pretty much that we already have the information that is required. And so the community college report is one about the courses that students took at that institution that were then not applied to a degree there. And because of the S and other CBM reports that we get, I think we're pretty confident that we already have all of the information that we need to generate those reports. We don't have the information that we're going to need from the four-year institutions. Because what they don't keep track of, and maybe some do better than others do, is the whole idea of the reason why that course was not applied. And sometimes that's simple. Well, the student got, what's on their transcript is an F or a W. So that's not going to transfer. Of course, they have a passing grade, but it may not be in that major. at all, so it's not going to apply. But there are a variety of reasons why a course may not be applied to a major, and the reporting piece for the four-year institutions calls for that kind of information that they don't actually have ready to hand. So, part of it is how do we get that? But we think that for the two-year piece of this, we have all of the information to generate those reports that we need. And then, of course, the institutions will want to review those and so forth. So any questions, comments about transfer in this regard or any other regard that we might be able to answer or address going forward, or things that we need to look at or take into account as we do this? We've asked for a lot of feedback on the four-year part, and at some point we'll ask for some feedback on the two-year piece of it as well, by the way.
Rex,
Go ahead.
can you clarify for us, he had mentioned the TEA piece on some of this dual credit reporting. I caught that, and I didn't know about that. Have you got any information on that for us?
So the only, and Julie, you can help me out if you remember something here, but the only thing I remember him talking about TEA on having a part of was on the open education resources
Yes.
piece. And so we've been in contact with TEA about this to determine, and we have this to work out still about how we're going to work with them and what that process will look like for us to vet those resources that they're going to develop out of this. And of course, the concern was that they be, truly college level materials. And even though the idea is to use them for dual credit, as we all know, a dual credit course is a college course you're getting high school credit for also. And so we wanted to make sure that they were truly college level materials. And the process for vetting those is still being worked out.
Thank you.
I don't recall John mentioning that, but I do know in discussions over the past year that when we're talking about dual credit, one of the issues has always been how do students pay for the textbook and who pays for the textbook, and there's some hope that at least OER will help with that process. And so how soon that will be is a question, but it may be in that context, but hopefully it will be a resource to address the textbook needs.
Yeah, and of course, as we have faculty in the state of Texas, through our own RFAs for open educational resources, we put a lot of emphasis on core courses and high enrollment core courses initially, and then over time, we hope to cast that net wider and wider to capture more and more sections. But initially we were thinking about, what's the most bang for the buck we can get out of this. And of course, a lot of dual credit courses are also core courses as well. And so hopefully there'll just be a lot of overlap there too, that then will also help dual credit students. Because, as most of you already know, that can be a big issue because the ISDs are required to pay for the textbooks. And that can get to be a significant monetary burden on them.
We've been having meetings with our dual credit partners, and even the electronic textbooks do not work well when it's going from one student to the next, and that has been quite the challenge. It sounds great, but in practicality, it's still kind of tough.
Yeah, and I discovered this when I was at Midland College, is that the electronic stuff, right, carries an initial lower price tag, but at the end of the semester, the code disappears. And so while you can take a paper textbook and resell it, you can't resell your code because it goes away. And so there are issues with that as well. And going forward, one of the good things about OER, and I think, there's a couple of things about it that are really attractive, and one is that it can be free or near free to the student, and they can be reused and always be there. But I think the other is that we lose sight of sometimes is the impact that this can also have on the teaching and learning process. You know, as a faculty member, it's real easy to get everything in the can from the publisher that you need to teach your course. And if you're not careful, that can cause you to not pay a lot of attention to those things. But OER, since you can take it and revise it, modify it, you can create it yourself or use what's there to create something for your own courses. I mean, I think the notion that it will get faculty much more involved in the materials that they use in a way, and then hopefully then that will also translate into students being much more involved in the material, that'll help the teaching and learning process. You know, because ultimately, I say this to a lot of people, ultimately for me, at the end of the day, the real issue is always about whether anybody's learning anything or not. And that really needs to be the ultimate aim of all of this. And so while I think OER is a great financial boon, I think it can also have a tremendous impact on the teaching and learning process as well. Any other questions, comments on transfer? So if not, I'd like to invite Jarrell Booker up to talk about ADV. So this is exciting stuff.
Almost good afternoon, good morning. I'm Jarrell Booker. I'm Assistant Commissioner for College Rating Success. I'm here to talk to you about ADV, our virtual advisor. Are any of you familiar with ADV at all? If you heard it previously? Okay, well, good. I'll start from the beginning. Have you heard of something called Andy? I shouldn't say that on the mic. Okay, yeah, you heard it under a different name. Unfortunately, getting the rights to certain things take a little longer than they need to. So I want to talk to you about our virtual advising system in partnership with the University of Texas at Austin, which is where we house our Advise Texas advisors. We created a chatbot, which is a system that has artificial intelligence, which is a learning tool that that's mixed with near-peer advisors to advise students about going to college and attending college and things around the college process. It's a texting system. It's not a calling system. So many of you are familiar with calling customer service and press this and press 7, and sometimes you just want to press 0 to speak to someone. This is actually a texting system where a student can text the artificial intelligence chatbot or receive a near-peer advisor, which I'll get to in a second. We are testing this system currently where we started in South Texas, Rio Grande Valley area, with people who've already stopped out of college. So we're trying to see what type of questions adults may have, what type of questions that people who've already went to college would be asking, and we're trying to train the chatbot. So the reason we developed this chatbot is we've learned that students, particularly K-12 students, but even adult students, ask questions after 10 p.m. So when they're up and they're thinking about it, and after work, they're asking these questions, and this chatbot allows us to meet students where they are. So on their devices, on their computer, on their phones, their iPads, but also when they're actually maybe asking these questions. What it also allows us to do is do it at scale. So it's the size of the state of Texas. You're getting thousands of the exact same question possibly. The chatbot does not differ if it's asked the same question 1,000 times or once. It's going to have the same tone, same attitude, and give the exact same answer. As opposed to, oh my God, yes, it's the FAFSA, and this is where you find it. The chatbot's going to still stay locked in with that student and answer that question as many times as it needs to. What we also found is students don't always like to ask what they may consider a dumb question. They'll ask a friend, but they won't ask an expert. And we think that the chatbot is allowing them to ask questions they may not normally ask, and ask multiple times because they may forget, and then the chatbot will be able to answer that question. What we have found also, particularly in rural areas, K-12 counselors don't have the time to necessarily answer the same question over and over, and they can actually direct their students to the chatbot to be able to answer these simple questions that they can ask, and if they need to escalate that, they can either go to their counselor or to one of our live near-peer advisors. So here's how it works. The chatbot has kind of two functions. One, which many of you seen, you can get online while you're on a website and actually ask a question. The website is called askadvi.org, where they can actually enter a question right there and get an answer. That currently is on a Facebook platform, which should be changing in about 2 months. That's how it was originally designed, but we agreed when we first started this process that we did not want that to be a requirement, and they'll fix that in about 2 months, which will be perfect timing for our full blown-out release. The second way is through texting, where we text your phone directly, whether we already have permission or you've opted in to receive a text. And that option is something I'm really excited about, because that's also going to have a phone number where students or the general public can text 24 hours a day and get a question answered from ADVI. During that process, if the chatbot is not answering the question, it can escalate to a live person to actually jump in and say, I see you're not getting your question answered, or ADVI told me you're having trouble with this. Let me go ahead and answer your question directly and engage with the live person, which is being trained through our Advise Texas process. So they're going through the same training as our current advisors. This is a picture of our webpage. You'll see in the right-hand corner, we're here to answer any questions you may have, and that's how they actually answer it, where they ask their questions. This right here, which is hard to see on the left-hand side, is kind of a conversation with ADVI. Can you help me with FAFSA? And then it gives you not only answers, but links to where you can get additional information. And some of the links may be static, some may be videos, and that way students can actually get the answers they need when they're actually asking. On the right, the left side is dealing with FAFSA, the right side is dealing with TSIA, dealing with becoming college ready, and questions that a lot of students may have, or parents may have in this sort of process that we're learning. You'll see the emoji. ADVI does have a personality. It does actually engage with the students. Over this testing process, we've learned a lot of words we haven't heard in a long time as adults. But we've also seen questions about where to get food, best wings, things like that, and ADVI's prepared for not only the bad words, but also the positive ones and the food questions. Right now, we're a little over 1,000 questions in the knowledge base. We hope to be about 2,000 before we actually officially launch. And as we test, it becomes smarter, and that's the beauty of the science. Yes.
You mentioned, but I didn't really catch the rollout date. That's number one. And number two, what about cost?
That's a great answer. So the rollout date is, we've been operating this for about 2 months now, and we're not releasing it to the entire world yet until we're sure of the questions and how it responds. Part of that is asking the colleges, you all, if someone asks a question about your college, where would you like it to go? So ADVI can say, well, you're asking about admissions, here's the phone number, here's the email that the schools have told us. So we've collected survey data from you all and your websites to actually have that sort of response. So once we get to a comfort level of the knowledge base, January 1 is when we'll say, hey, world, whether it's billboards, social media, this is something that's ready for you to actually engage with. As far as the cost, it's surprisingly not as expensive as some may seem. Most of the cost was in the development of the tool, and then we pay for the near-peer advisors, which generally is a graduate stipend or something like that for people who may want to be a counselor or a former near-peer advisor to be on call and to check the site and get notifications to actually respond. I'll give you an example. The tool itself is less than $50,000. So depending on how you ramp up, how many questions we have, that cost continue to grow. But we do think there's going to be, something I'll get into in a second, there are institutions, nonprofits, businesses who want to partner with the coordinating board to actually do more with their own students and own population, and there's an opportunity to actually help it kind of pay for itself as we're moving forward.
Thank you.
No problem. This is just a slide of who we can reach with ADV, returning adults, as students who want to ask questions. Like I said earlier, a lot of times people who are in the workforce, and by the time they get home, deal with their families, it's 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and to be able to ask a question and remember to call the college has been difficult. This gives them a chance to actually ask questions while they're up and thinking about it. We all know good advising matters, but that freeing up time and energy for students to focus on learning and actually getting the paperwork done is something we think is critical, but more importantly, it's freeing up time for your institutions, your advisors, as well as school district counselors to be able to answer questions. The role of the advising of the virtual advisor is clearly you're not going to replace people. At the end of the day, there's going to be information that changes. There's going to be information that there's always going to be someone who wants to speak to a person, so it's not trying to replace people. But one thing that you don't see on this slide that we have found is critical is the amount of information we gain from the questions we get that we can give back to you all. So if we're getting 300-400 questions about the same issue, that means the state's not doing a very good job explaining it, or your website is not clear for somebody to navigate, and that's something we'll just turn back over to you. Hey, we're getting a lot of questions about this on your page. Do as you seem fit, but we're just letting you know. A lot of questions about prior year for FAFSA. Those are sort of things that we'll learn from this sort of tool that you're not going to necessarily get from people. The tool naturally generates that sort of data and naturally gives us an ability to respond and build a knowledge base around it so we don't keep getting the same sort of questions. I talked about the process, this iterative design process. Testing, trying to trick the chatbot, using words a different way, a lot of your colleges have, acronyms, those sort of things. We're constantly developing the knowledge base for the chatbot and making sure we get to a point where it's a constant level of improvement, constant sort of evaluation of the language, and then come January 1st, we'll feel comfortable that we have enough knowledge and enough questions, enough responses that we can actually be a tool that the students are more comfortable using. We're also going to rotate our advisors, the near peer, the live advisors, based off of when we start getting questions. So we're going to monitor if more questions are coming at 1 o'clock, then hey, your time is going to be between 1 and 3 a.m. to be able to respond. And for graduate students, some of them will be excited about getting a job where they can actually work at that time because they're still up. Aaron Willig, who was not able to be here today, is our main point of contact for this. We're getting a lot of calls nationally around ADV, so we're excited that Texas is the leader in this. You all are familiar that schools, individual institutions have this in a lot of instances, but some are just for admissions. Some may just be for financial aid, but this is general college across the board, K-12 all the way through, returning students and parents, and we think it'll be we know we're a leader nationally on this, and if we keep building the knowledge base, then we'll definitely be in a position to support all of your institutions, as well as the 1,200 school districts we have in the state of Texas. That said, I'm open to any questions you may have around the chatbot or the advisors. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rex.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is discussion of marketable skills. We could have Dr. Gosselin come forward.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me today. Rex asked me, Dr. Peebles asked me to give an update on marketable skills to you today. So I have probably more slides than you need, but I wanted to be able to have information on hand in case you had questions. So what we're going to talk about is really, we're at a point now where we feel like we're so familiar with the goal, we kind of need to take a step back and make sure that everybody else is as familiar with it as we are. I want to share with you what we've done so far in terms of implementation. what we've learned from the field in terms of where you are as institutions on implementation, and then the supports that we have available to help you on your campuses. So the goal reads that by 2030, all graduates will be graduating from public institutions with identified marketable skills. So we've left what the definition of marketable skills is in a fairly undefined way, because we want you to take ownership of what that means. The way 60 by 30 text was written was in a way that 2- and 4-year institutions could take local ownership of the goals, of the plan overall, and implement in a way that's aligned with your mission as an institution. So when we were devising the higher education strategic plan, the headlines were riddled with things like, employers are not getting what they need. But we know from historic conversations with employers that what they need is really covered in the core curriculum. So we don't always get a clear context for what employers are needing, because what they tell us is what higher education is offering. So the marketable skills goal was really designed around explicating the value of higher education, making it clear to students that the time and money they're spending on their college credential is worth it. And we feel like this is a good time to revisit these headlines, because take a look at the dates on these. We still need to hammer that message that the value of higher education is absolutely worth the time and the money. These kinds of headlines have not disappeared. And especially in the face of the student debt, what people are calling the crises of student debt loans, we again need to keep focused on the value of higher education, and the marketable skills goal is really well poised to do that, because what it means is that students will walk away with a very clear picture of the skills they have either gained or improved during their time in higher education. So the targets, there's 2 under this goal. One, that is the 2020 benchmark. So by next year, the target is that all institutions will have created a process to identify these skills and have implemented it. The other target is a metric that we've been collecting for close to 20 years, I think, where we follow graduates from graduation into workforce or continuing their education in higher ed. And it's been about 80% for the last 5 or 6 years, and we just want to maintain that. So what we've done so far as a coordinating body is we've hosted a couple of marketable skills conferences, and you'll see on the right-hand side, we have another one coming in 2020. We have released guidelines to help with practical implementation ideas for your campuses. We also have a career readiness handbook and an internship toolkit, which I will share in just a moment. And in addition, as part of our accountability system, we have what we kind of call the backstage data collection, where we can ask your institution's information, but we don't make the results of that public facing. And so we have been asking, how's it going in terms of the marketable skills goal, and we have some data that we can share on that. Some of the other things that are coming soon, we are part of a study from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. A study team, in fact, from Paris, France, is coming to Texas this weekend. They're going to be visiting some of your regions, and they're going to be culminating their meeting in Austin in about 10 days. So we're pretty excited about that. What they're looking at, what they're talking about when they come to some of the cities in Texas are the higher education outcomes in the labor market. So they're meeting with some of you as institutions. They're also meeting with employers to learn how higher education is working for them as a pipeline for their employees. One of the other pieces we have that's coming pretty soon as well is the Marketable Skills Task Force, and I'm going to defer to Rex on that.
So one of the things that I think vexes everybody a lot with the marketable skills goal is the notion of the language to be used. So business and industry tends to use, or to describe rather, skills and knowledge in one way, while higher education always uses the language of student learning outcomes to describe skills and knowledge. and the two may not be the same. Plus, we found that, and I think Ginger alluded to this, is that there's oftentimes a disconnect between what it is that employers say they want and what they really want, and also trying to figure out just exactly what it is they want. So if you ask employers quite often, overall what you will get on a regular basis is, well, we want people who can communicate, we want people that can critically think, and we want people that can play nice together. All right? And oh, and by the way, show up on time for work and that kind of thing. And so but what we know is that institutions teach an array of skills and knowledge that go way beyond that. And I think one of the things that we have always been convinced of is that students are learning these things. It's just that it's not necessarily being made explicitly clear to institutions, to business and industry, to employers that they are. So part of what we've done, or the idea behind the Marketable Skills Task Force, and we actually have a consultant working on this for us to help bring this thing together, is to have employers in the room and eventually add higher education officials as well, to sort of create that dialogue or conversation between the two about what is it they're really looking for. And so we see this a lot, particularly at the community college level. You see that a lot in advisory committees, where you bring them together for a specific program, and sometimes they can be very explicit about what it is that they need in their company. But part of our mission is to prepare individuals to go work at a lot of different companies, and to prepare them broadly so they can go a lot of different places to go to work, and not just prepare a student for a job. And so part of that is understanding what it is that people are looking for on a more global basis. And so the idea is to bring this group together as somewhat of an advisory committee, if you will, to help inform both the coordinating board, but also help inform institutions about what kind of marketable skills, and a marketable skill is one that you can sell to an employer in a sense. And so what kind of skills and knowledge are they really looking for? And how do we make sure that institutions understand the language that they're using, and that they understand the language that institutions are using?
What is the timeline on that?
So sometime this fall, we'll have a sort of invited guest, if you will, meeting at the leadership conference, which will be in November, and I forget the exact dates, but most of you have probably already seen the save the dates thing for that. And then we'll have a couple of meetings actually will come out of sort of an initial invited group to sort of form this thing. And then probably early spring actually is when we'll actually set the advisory committee and establish it as a sort of a formal unit, just as all of our other advisory committees are. And actually we have the rule for that will formally establish it as an advisory committee going to the September calls and October board meeting.
Great, thank you. So that's part of the coming soon profile. Something else that's coming soon, in quotes, I'll put in quotes, is an implementation best practices guidebook. So part of that accountability system where we asked, how's it going? We asked your institutions to describe, what are you doing? What's working? And we're going to cull through that data and find some ideas that we think are really promising. So really it should be a promising practices guidelines that we'll be sharing in the future. As Rex mentioned, the leadership conference, that is the 21st and 22nd of November. The second day is going to be focused on marketable skills. There's a marketable skills theme for the leadership conference this year, so we highly encourage you to sign up for that. And again, the conference will be doing another one in 2020. So how's it going? As part of that backstage accountability, like I said, we had a little survey that just tried to ask very clearly, have you created a process and have you implemented a process for marketable skills? So all institutions that responded, or all institutions that were sent the survey, over 40% said, yes, we have done both. About 20% said, no, we've started, but we haven't quite finished implementing. Another 20% or so said, no, we haven't really started. And then we had another 20% roughly that said, I don't want to talk about it. So this is what we, it was a good signal to us to know that we need to revisit this goal. We need to reach out and provide more support. So we are planning additional support efforts this year, possibly some webinars to help your institutions get a better grasp of at least starting the goal. But I also wanted to share this same data. Universities looked very similar to the overall profile, but they had a much greater proportion of folks who had started but hadn't finished. And fewer people who didn't respond. Your sector, roughly the same percentage. Everyone had 41% that, yes, they've created a process and implemented. You had a greater proportion of folks who said we haven't started. So I think we need to show a special attention to your sector in terms of providing support on how to get started and how to again, create that process and implement it for identifying marketable skills. And we really are hopeful that the task force that Rex described will go a long way in helping with that. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So that second target that I mentioned, the metric that we've been following for quite some time, we are holding steady. So that's some great news in terms of the marketable skills goal. And this is a screenshot from our 60by30text.com website, which provides updates annually on all of the goals and the targets. So if you haven't explored that site, I highly recommend it at www.60by30text.com. So what are the available supports right now? Well, we have the guidelines that I mentioned earlier. This is a living document. We update it as we get more improved information. We probably have not, how many of you have seen this or heard of this document? Okay. It's probably time to share that again because we have updated it recently to show the new data that I just shared. These are the major sections of that document, trying to give you a big picture of how marketable skills absolutely fits into the mission of higher education. It fits into the work your institutions are doing. It fits into being part of a student-centered master plan for higher ed. It tries to get into the logistics of what is actually required by the goal and to give you practical suggestions on how to start. That's what the guidelines was designed to do. We have also created a career readiness handbook, and this is for your students. It's posted on that 60by30text.com website that I mentioned. Students will have to print it. It's a PDF, but it provides some practical ways for students to think through what they want to do and how they want to market themselves once they're finished with college or as they're going through college. How do they accumulate the skills they need for what they want to do? We give, again, these are the high-level sections of the handbook, understanding hard and soft skills. How do you get these? What are the career options aligned with the skills that you are learning in higher ed? Thinking about career satisfaction. As Rex mentioned, we're not just training students for a job, we're training them for a lifetime of shifting because the job market is not the same as it used to be. We don't really hire people to stay in jobs for 20 years anymore. We hire them to stay, we hope, for 5 years, maybe just 2. In fact, I was at a meeting earlier this week where someone who was representing a national organization of states was speaking about how states are tweaking their promotion of job openings, where they're trying to market their openings to younger people in the hopes that they will apply, but they're not marketing their jobs as, hey, come work here and get a great pension after 25 years. They're now marketing those jobs of, hey, come work here for as long as you want to work here and tackle those big, hairy problems. You can have an exciting job where you make a real impact, you can make a difference. So again, we're thinking about shifting away from training someone for that 20, 30-year career trajectory to that 20, 30-year changing job trajectory. And again, the focus of the handbook is really how to market yourself as a student and a graduate, because the marketable skills goal is really about poising students so that they can market themselves to employers. And these are some of the, this is an example of one of the activities that's listed in the handbook to try to get students to think through what is it that you're learning in your program, and how can you market yourself for education opportunities while you're in school and jobs after you're out. The other piece we've been working on recently, we released this earlier this year. This is an internship toolkit for employers. Now, we also hope it will be a riveting read for you as well, but the audience is actually employers, and it's designed to help employers either create or tweak an existing program so that internships will be aligned with 60 by 30 techs. So one of the emphasis in the toolkit is to really encourage employers to pay their interns. You know, our Commissioner Paredes has always talked about this, where he believes that it's not really fair to not pay interns, because who are the folks who can afford to take an unpaid internship for the summer? Those are not the majority of students in Texas. The majority of students in Texas are those who need this kind of support. We're focusing on low-income students. Those are the majority of high school graduates. So I think to be fair and equitable and to do what's right for the state of Texas, internships should be paid. And we try to make that argument more eloquently than I just did in the toolkit. One of the other things we talk about in the toolkit is showing data that really presses home the point that an internship as an educational opportunity is really valuable as a stepping stone into a job. Many organizations use their internship programs to not just train future workers, but test out whether or not that person is a good fit. And this graph shows the percentage of interns offered a permanent placement after their internship was completed. That's the gray line, so it's pretty high. And then the red line is the percentage of people who were offered that accepted. And what I find interesting about this graph is that if you look at the most recent recession, say 2008 through 2011, the gray line, the offers went down, but the red line, the acceptances, stayed steady. So internships are also a great way to protect students against economic shifts. And just want to close with, you know, marketable skills is really, like all the goals, interdependent. So 60 by 30 techs, as you know, is designed to be student focused, and all of these goals were built to be dependent on one another. So 60 by 30 techs, the educated, or 60 by 30, the educated population, that's the goal that's going to get us where we're going. But it's the other three that are going to support that. So completion. We know from data that it's getting that credential that matters. If you don't finish, you're not going to have the same labor market outcomes. So completing that degree is really important for a student to set themselves up for life success. And when a student completes their program, they are exposing themselves to all of the marketable skills available to them. You know, again, you are not just teaching students new skills, you're enhancing skills they already have. And when a student gets all of those marketable skills, they are in the best position to market themselves to get a well-paying job. And a well-paying job will position the student then to pay off their student debt, which, again, we really want students to think about student debt as a tool to get to that completion. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. But not from you, Rex. No, I'm kidding.
To ask you a question, I'm supposed to know all the answers already, right? When you looked at that little pie chart of responses from the institutions, one of the things that Dr. Gossman did not mention is that when we looked at this, there's that a fairly significant percentage of institutions that simply did not respond. And we assumed, perhaps wrongfully, but we assumed that they didn't respond because they didn't have anything to report, which means they may very well be in that no, the process has not been created or implemented category as well. So I have been asked about, so the goal says that by 2020, they're supposed to have all this done. And so since we're getting close to 2020, then I'm starting to getting to questions about, well, so when in 2020? You know, because there's a big difference between January of 2020 and December of 2020 in terms of due dates. And the accountability system itself is usually reported in
January of the following year.
Yeah.
So January 2021 would be the 2020 data.
Yeah. So that kind of tells you something about the deadline. But I can also tell you that in working with institutions over the past couple of years on this, this is not one of those things that you can start one week and have completed the next week. This will take some time and effort on the part of your faculty and administrators to put this into place and to really vet it. So I would encourage any institution that hasn't really thought about this yet to really think about it and get started, and let us know how we can help you with that.
Yes, please let us know. You know, again, this was a really important signal to us that we needed to do more to provide support. And I know that both Rex and I have been invited to campuses to help with implementation. I have, on a couple of occasions, provided a sort of coaching role in this, so please reach out. Okay, well, thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. So any other questions or comments about that? That brings us to the most exciting part of the agenda, and that's the discussion of future agenda items and future meeting dates. And you can see that we've already posted future meeting dates there, so put them on your calendars, and if there's issues, let us know in far in advance as we can, or as it's possible for you to let us know.
Rex,
Yes, sir.
as I look at future meeting dates, November 14th is a meeting date that's scheduled, but also I think it's the following week or the next week after that, we are having the leadership conference. Am I correct?
Yeah, the leadership conference is November 21 and 22, I
Yes.
believe.
So my question for those of us who plan to attend both, is there some way to be creative here and perhaps fold the first part of the first day of the leadership conference and actually have our meeting then? As opposed to for those of us who have to commute to Austin,
Right.
it will cut down on one trip. Just something to think about.
We will certainly look into the possibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. 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 You know, and I don't know, but I suspect that Thursday, March the 12th is going to be, could very well be in the middle of a lot of spring
Yeah,
breaks.
that's what I was thinking.
But it's only an hour. If we have an amended meeting too, that might present an option.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. Okay, so that gives us a couple of things to look at going forward. But we can certainly explore the idea of meeting prior to or after the leadership conference, whatever might be more convenient for folks, and if that works out. So, and I'll certainly make sure that Mr. Walker is apprised of all of this. And
We'll mention, just looking at the date, it won't affect you, but it's, we have a Lumina conference regarding some grants. Several staff will need to be there in California on the 14th. So we should probably check that as well. It won't affect you. I'd have to check and see who else it will,
but it could affect a lot of other staff, right? Yeah.
at least 2 or 3 others.
And that's the November date, right? You said the 14th, right? Okay.
So that means
Yeah, so that may also be something to look at. Okay. All right. Probably, I would, yeah.
You guys can live without me, but not
Maybe not both of you. Yeah. Okay, and as y'all look at, if you, going forward, if you see any other issues with the calendar, just let us know, and we'll try to put that into the mix in trying to determine the future dates for this. Future agenda items. So we try our best to be responsive to the things that are on your institution's minds or the trustees' minds, and the things that y'all want to know about or a more in-depth look at, or whatever it might be. So if you have any ideas right now, then let me know. If not, then please send them to me, or send them to Ron Walker, your chair, and or both of us, so that we can start looking at that and make the necessary preparations for the staff or speakers we'll need to present and gather the information and that kind of thing. So does anybody have anything right now that they would like to put forward for a future agenda item? And there are some things, of course, that we'll keep you apprised of. I think that Senate Bill 25 is one of those things that will capture a lot of attention for quite some time. And so we'll probably plan on a little bit of update on it, and then about where we are with, always at every meeting, about where we are with the rulemaking and so forth, and about where we are internally with setting up reports and processes and that kind of stuff as well. So. Okay. All right. So anybody else have anything for the good of the order? All right. So I think the only thing we ever vote on is adjournment, right? So since I'm not the chair, I'm going to need a motion for adjournment. Move to adjourn. All right.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. And all those in favor can vote by getting up and leaving the room. So, all right. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it, and we always appreciate your input.
You bet. Thank you for having us. You did well as a chair.